After 3 years at war, a battle-hardened soldier returns home only to find his young son shivering on the porch in the freezing cold. Inside, the boy's mother has moved on with another man, leaving the child neglected and bruised. As the father uncovers betrayal, abuse, and a dark secret, he vows to fight for custody. What follows is a gripping battle for justice, love, and a safe home, ending in a tearful reunion neither will ever forget. November 11th, 2023, Veterans Day. Most folks were inside, warm, watching parades on television. But Daniel Carter was standing at the end of Maple Street, staring at a house that used to be his. 3 years he'd been gone. 3 years fighting someone else's war in a desert that tasted like copper and regret. His duffel bag hung over his shoulder like a question mark. Inside, 2 purple hearts, a bronze star, and a letter from Noah, his boy, dated 8 months ago. The last one he'd received. The last one that said, "I love you, Daddy. Come home soon." But it was the small shape on the porch that stopped his heart cold. There, curled up against the front door like some forgotten package, was a child. His child, Noah, 7 years old. Shivering in a jacket 2 sizes too small, clutching something in his small fist. As Daniel drew closer, his boots crunching on frost-covered leaves, he could see what the boy held so tight. A broken toy soldier. His toy soldier. The same green plastic warrior Daniel had carried through his own childhood. The one he'd left behind when he shipped out, thinking it would keep his son company. Now it lay in pieces in Noah's palm, its tiny rifle snapped, its painted face worn, smooth by small fingers and salt tears. The sight of it hit Daniel like a mortar round to the chest. He remembered the day he'd given that soldier to Noah, remembered kneeling in this same spot, on this same porch, promising his 3-year-old son that the little green man would keep him safe until Daddy came home. "This is Sergeant Sam," he'd told Noah, placing the toy carefully in those tiny hands. "He's been with me since I was your age. Now he's gonna watch over you while I'm gone. And when I come back, you can tell me all the adventures you two had together." But the soldier was broken now, just like everything else Daniel had left behind. Just like the promises he'd made. Just like the family he'd tried so hard to protect from an ocean away. "Noah?" Daniel's voice came out rougher than he intended, like gravel grinding against glass. The boy's head snapped up, and Lord have mercy. Those eyes, blue as summer sky, but filled with winter storms. Eyes that had seen too much, known too much fear for someone so small. For a moment, neither of them moved. Father and son, separated by 3 years and 10,000 miles of pain, staring at each other across the wreckage of what used to be their life together. Then Noah's lips trembled, and one word escaped like a prayer. "Daddy?" The word was barely a whisper, carried away by the wind before Daniel could catch it. But he heard it. Felt it. Let it wash over him like absolution. He dropped to his knees on that cold porch, not caring about the ice soaking through his fatigues, and opened his arms. Noah flew into them like a missile seeking home, all sharp elbows and desperate fingers, and the kind of need that only comes from a child who's been waiting too long for someone to save him. Daniel held him close, this small miracle he'd helped create. This perfect blend of his DNA and Laura's stubborn streak, and something purely, uniquely Noah. The boy felt fragile as bird bones, trembling against his chest like he might break apart if held too tight, or float away if not held tight enough. "I'm here, son. I'm home." But Noah pulled back, those storm-filled eyes searching his father's face like he was looking for proof, for some sign that this wasn't just another dream that would dissolve with the dawn. Are you staying this time?" The question hit Daniel harder than any I'd blast. Because how do you explain to a 7-year-old that you didn't choose to leave? That war takes fathers and gives back strangers? That some wounds never heal, they just learn to bleed quieter? How do you tell a child that you spent 3 years in hell? dodging bullets and watching good men die. Not for glory or country or any of the noble reasons they write about in history books, but for this moment, right here, for the chance to kneel on this porch and hold your son and make promises you pray to God you can keep. I'm staying, he said, and prayed to whatever God still listened, that he could make that promise true. That's when he noticed the bruises. Small ones, faded yellow-green around Noah's wrist, like fingerprints pressed too hard into delicate skin. Fresh purple ones peeking out from under his collar, dark as storm clouds against his pale neck. A cut on his lip that looked maybe 2 days old, scabbed over, but still tender. These weren't playground bruises. These weren't the random scrapes and bumps that come with being 7 years old and fearless. These were deliberate, precise, the kind that come from adult hands, from grown-up anger finding its way to small shoulders. Daniel's vision went red around the edges. In Afghanistan, they called it combat tunnel vision. Here, on his own front porch, holding his injured son, they might just call it justice preparing to be served cold. But he kept his voice gentle, kept his hands soft, because Noah was watching him with those enormous eyes, looking for any sign that Daddy might be dangerous too. Looking for any reason to run back to whatever corner he'd been hiding in, whatever small space he'd carved out for himself in a house that should have been sanctuary but had become something else entirely. Noah, he kept his voice steady as still water, who's been taking care of you? The boy's eyes darted to the house, then back to his father's face. Fear lived there now, alongside the hope. Fear that even Daddy couldn't fix this. Fear that telling the truth might make the bad things worse. Mama's got a friend now, Ethan. He said you weren't coming back. He said soldiers like you forget about home. You find new families in other countries, and you don't come back to the old ones. Noah's voice was small, careful, like he was stepping through a minefield with every word. He said I should stop asking about you, stop waiting, stop ... The boy's voice cracked like his toy soldier, all sharp edges and painful truths. Stop being such a baby about it. Daniel felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Something that had nothing to do with the November wind and everything to do with the kind of rage that burns steady and quiet, like a pilot light waiting for gas. And when you wouldn't stop waiting, when you kept asking about me? Noah looked down at his broken toy soldier, ran one small finger over its cracked face. He said I was bothering them, making Mama sad, making things hard, so he said maybe I should wait outside, so they could have grown-up time. How long have you been waiting outside, son? Since? Noah scrunched up his face, doing the kind of mental math that 7-year-olds do, counting on fingers that were red with cold. Since before it got dark, maybe since lunch. I had crackers in my pocket, but I ate them already. Sweet Jesus, this child had been sitting on this porch for hours, in November, in Michigan, while his mother and her boyfriend had grown up time inside the house that used to be Daniel's home. Daniel Carter had seen evil before, seen it wearing uniforms and carrying flags. Seen it hiding behind politics and religion and patriotism, but evil that puts its hands on children, that sends a little boy out into the cold because his love is inconvenient. That was a different kind of war entirely. The front door opened then, spilling yellow light across the porch like honey, and out stepped a woman Daniel barely recognized. Lavra, his wife, or ex-wife, if the papers she'd sent to his forward operating base meant anything. She looked older, harder on the edges, like someone had taken sandpaper to her softness and worn it all away. Her blonde hair was shorter now, styled in a way that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly combat pay. Her clothes were new, expensive designer jeans that hugged curves that used to belong to him, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people made in a week. Everything about her screamed that she'd moved on, moved up, moved away from the soldier she'd married and the promises, They'd met in a little church in Dearborn when they were both 22 and thought love could conquer anything. Daniel. His name in her mouth sounded like an accusation. Like he was the one who'd done something wrong by coming home. Like he was the one who'd broken faith. You're early. I'm exactly when I said I'd be. He stood slowly, keeping Noah close to his side, feeling the boy's small hand slip into his like an anchor. Question is, why is my son sleeping on the porch like some stray dog? Laura's eyes flickered, quick as a snake's tongue from Daniel's face to Noah's, then to something behind Daniel's shoulder. She was calculating, he realized, weighing options, deciding how much truth she could afford to tell and how many lies she could get away with. He's not your son anymore, Daniel. Legally speaking, the words hit him like sniper fire, clean, precise, meant to kill. Come again? The papers I sent you, the custody agreement. You never signed them, so I had you declared absent, unfit. The court gave me sole custody 3 months ago. 3 months. He'd been on patrol 3 months ago, dodging roadside bombs and watching his brothers bleed out in the sand. Fighting for freedom while she was filing papers to steal his. Unfit. The word tasted like ashes in his mouth. Based on what exactly? Lavra lifted her chin, defiant. Based on the fact that you chose your war over your family. Based on the fact that you re-enlisted when I begged you not to. Based on the fact that you missed Noah's first day of school. His birthday, his t-ball games, his first loose tooth. Her voice was rising now. 3 years of resentment spilling out like water from a broken dam. Based on the fact that when your son needed you most, you were playing soldier with your buddies in the desert. Daniel felt Noah's hand tighten in. His felt the boy's small body press closer to his leg. This wasn't the homecoming any of them had dreamed of. This wasn't the reunion Lavra used to write about in her letters, back when she still wrote letters. Back when she still signed them, love always. And the bruises? His voice had gone quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes before thunder. How do you explain those in your fitness reports to the court? Laura's jaw tightened, but before she could answer, a shadow moved in the hallway behind her. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of swagger that comes from never having been truly tested, never having stared down the barrel of real consequence. Everything all right out here, babe? The voice was smooth, confident, entitled, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd never had to whisper coordinates for a medevac helicopter or hold pressure on a buddy's sucking chest wound while calling for backup that might not come. Ethan. He stepped into the doorway, and Daniel sized him up in the space between heartbeats. 6'2", maybe 6'3". Close to 220, but soft around the middle where his expensive shirt stretched tight. Manicured hands that had never held anything heavier than a martini glass or a golf club. Perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect everything, except for the eyes. The eyes were cold, calculating. Predator's eyes. This was the kind of man who wore his wealth like armor, who thought money could buy him anything he wanted, including other men's families. The kind of man who saw a deployed soldier's wife and children not as people with their own hearts and histories, but as opportunities, acquisitions. And you must be Daniel. Ethan's smile was all teeth, no warmth, like a shark that had learned to walk on land. Laura's told me so much about you, the hero, the protector. He said the words like they tasted bad, like they were jokes only he understood. Though I notice you weren't here when she needed protecting. Noah pressed closer to Daniel's leg, small fingers gripping his father's fatigues like a lifeline. Even at 7 years old, he could feel the electricity in the air, the tension crackling between the 3 adults like live wire. That's interesting, Daniel said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that made smart men nervous. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the only thing she needed protection from was you. Ethan's smile faltered. Just for a second. But Daniel caught it, filed it away with all the other intelligence he'd gathered in 30 seconds of observation. This man was used to intimidating people with money and lawyers and legal papers. He wasn't used to someone who'd learned to read threats in the dark, someone who'd survived by recognizing predators before they could strike. "I think you should leave," Ethan said, stepping closer, trying to use his height advantage like a weapon. "This is my house now. These are my people now. You're trespassing." "Funny thing about houses," Daniel replied, not moving an inch, not giving ground. "They remember who built them, who loved them, who bled for them." He looked directly into Ethan's eyes, the same stare he'd used on enemy combatants, the one that said, "I've killed better men than you for less reason." And they remember who protected the people inside. The air between them crackled with tension. Two alpha males circling each other while a child watched from the shadows and a woman held her breath. This was the moment Daniel had been dreading and anticipating for 3 years. The moment when he'd have to face the man who'd stolen his life, piece by piece, while he was an ocean away and powerless to stop it. But it was Noah who broke the standoff, his small voice cutting through the adult posturing like a knife through silk. "Daddy," he whispered, tugging on Daniel's pants leg. "Can we go home now?" Home, such a simple word. Such an impossible request, because this house, with its fresh paint and manicured lawn and expensive cars in the driveway, this wasn't home anymore. Home was where you were wanted. Home was where you were safe. Home was where love lived louder than fear. Daniel looked down at his son, really looked at him for the first time since coming home. Beyond the bruises and the fear, beyond the too small jacket and the broken toy soldier, he saw something that made his heart break and swell at the same time. He saw himself at that age. The same determined chin, the same stubborn cowlick that refused to stay down no matter how much his mother tried to tame it. The same fierce loyalty that would rather suffer in silence than betray someone he loved. But he also saw something else. Something that made his blood run cold and his hands clench into fists despite his best efforts to stay calm. He saw a child soldier. A 7-year-old boy who'd learned to read adult moods like weather patterns, who'd developed the same hyper-vigilant awareness that kept Daniel alive in combat zones. Noah's eyes were constantly moving, watching faces, measuring distances to exits, calculating threats. This wasn't childhood. This was survival. "We'll figure it out, son," Daniel said, kneeling down to Noah's level. "But first, I need to ask you something important. And I need you to tell me the truth, even if it's scary. Even if someone told you not to tell. Can you do that?" Noah nodded, those storm cloud eyes never leaving his father's face. "Has Ethan ever hurt you? Ever put his hands on you when he was angry?" The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. "Once, quick, like admitting it might make it real all over again." "And your mama? Did she know?" This time Noah's hesitation was longer. His eyes flicked to Lovra, then back to Daniel, confusion and loyalty warring on his young face. This was the impossible position every abused child finds themselves in, torn between truth and protection, between their own pain and their love for the adults who should be protecting them. She tried to stop him sometimes," Noah whispered, his voice so quiet Daniel had to lean closer to hear. "But Ethan said if she made him leave, we wouldn't have money for food, or the house or my school. He said it was my fault for being bad, for making noise when they wanted quiet, for asking too many questions about you." Daniel closed his eyes, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest like concrete. When he opened them again, his gaze found Laura's face, and what he saw there told him everything he needed to know. Guilt, shame, fear, but also something that looked almost like relief. Like she'd been carrying this secret so long that even being caught felt like a kind of freedom. She'd been trapped too. Maybe not physically, but trapped all the same. Trapped by fear and financial dependence and the slow erosion of self-worth that comes from living with a predator who's learned to hunt with psychological warfare instead of physical force. Lavra, he said quietly, is that true? She couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't look at Noah, could only stare at her expensive shoes and nod, tears streaming down her face like acid rain. I didn't know how to stop it, she whispered. I didn't know how to get out. He controlled everything, Daniel. The bank accounts, the credit cards, even my phone. He monitored my emails, my texts, my calls. He said if I tried to leave him, he'd make sure I lost Noah completely. That no court would give custody to someone who couldn't provide for their child. Behind her, Ethan's face had gone dark, the mask of charm sliding away to reveal something ugly underneath. Something that had probably been there all along, hidden behind expensive suits and charitable donations, and the kind of public persona that fooled everyone, except the people who had to live with it. Shut up, Lavra, he hissed, his voice carrying an edge of menace that made Noah flinch. You don't know what you're talking about. You're emotional, hysterical, making things sound worse than they are. Am I? Lavra looked up then, meeting Daniel's eyes for the first time since he'd arrived. And for a moment he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who'd been fierce and independent and strong enough to love a soldier, despite all the reasons she shouldn't. Tell him about the contracts, Ethan. Tell him about the insurance policies you made me sign, with you as the beneficiary. Tell him about the recordings you made of me, not compromising myself. Tell him about the photographs. Tell him about all the ways you made sure I could never leave. Daniel stood slowly, everything inside him going quiet and cold and focused. In the desert, they called it going tactical, that state of hyper-awareness where time slowed down and priorities became crystal clear, and everything that wasn't essential to survival simply fell away. Here, holding his bruised son on a porch that used to be his, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd tried to protect, they might call it something else entirely. Recordings? He said softly. Ethan's composure cracked completely. She's lying. She's crazy. She's been unstable ever since. Since you started blackmailing her? Daniel's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, the kind that comes from seeing too many interrogations, too many confessions, too many predators backed into corners. Since you started using her child as leverage? Since you started beating a 7-year-old boy to keep his mother in line? You can't prove anything, Ethan snarled, but the fear in his eyes said otherwise. Said that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to realize that Daniel Carter wasn't the same naive young soldier who'd shipped out 3 years ago. That war had changed him, shaped him into something harder and more focused and infinitely more dangerous than the boy who'd kissed his wife goodbye at the airport. Can't I? Daniel reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, giving Ethan plenty of time to see exactly what he was doing, and pulled out a small device, modern, expensive, military grade. This conversation's been recorded since I got here, he said. Quietly, every word, every threat, every admission. Digital timestamp, GPS coordinates, military-grade encryption. He pressed a button, and their voices echoed back from the device, tinny but unmistakably clear. Has Ethan ever hurt you? Ever put his hands on you when he was angry? She tried to stop him sometimes, but Ethan said if she made him leave, we wouldn't have money for food. He said it was my fault for being bad. Tell him about the recordings you made of me, compromising myself. Tell him about all the ways you made sure I could never leave. Ethan's face went white as bone, then red as fresh blood. That's illegal. That's entrapment. That won't hold up in court, won't it? Daniel's smile was sharp as a combat knife. In Michigan, you only need one-party consent for recording conversations you're part of. Since this involves threats against my child and my family, I'm well within my rights. But that's just the beginning. He reached into another pocket and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers and photographs. The kind of folder that suggested weeks of planning, months of investigation, the patient work of someone who'd learned to be very, very thorough. 3 weeks I've been stateside, Ethan. 3 weeks doing research, background checks, financial investigations, medical consultations, building a case. The folder fell open, spilling its contents onto the porch like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle finally coming together. Hospital records showing Noah's injuries over the past 18 months, documented by pediatricians who'd noted the patterns, the frequency, the telltale signs of systematic abuse. Bank statements showing large withdrawals from accounts Daniel had never authorized, transfers to offshore accounts, investments in properties he'd never seen, insurance policies taken out in his name while he was deployed, with Ethan listed as the beneficiary, property transfer documents signed with forged signatures while Daniel was dodging IEDs in Kandahar, and photographs, dozens of them. Ethan at charity events, wearing military dress uniform he'd never earned. Ethan at bars, telling war stories to captivated audiences about battles he'd never fought, brothers he'd never lost, medals he'd never earned. Ethan with Lavra at fundraisers for veterans organizations, playing the part of the wounded warrior who understood her struggles as a military wife. Stolen valor, Daniel said quietly, the words falling into the November air like stones into still water. That's a federal crime, Ethan. 5 years in federal prison, minimum. And that's before we get to the fraud, the forgery, the identity, theft, the child abuse, the extortion. Lavra was staring at the papers scattered around her feet, understanding dawning in her eyes like sunrise after a long night. You've been planning this, she whispered. Even before you came home, you knew. I suspected, Daniel corrected. When your letters stopped coming. When Noah's calls got shorter and more scared. When the bank started sending me notices about accounts I didn't remember opening. When my unit's casualty notification officer told me someone had been calling, asking about death benefits. He let that sink in for a moment, watching Ethan's face cycle through a dozen different emotions before settling on something that looked like raw panic. A smart soldier always does reconnaissance before engaging the enemy, Daniel continued. So I started asking questions, making calls, following digital breadcrumbs. Amazing what you can learn when you know which databases to access, which records to check, which people to ask. He pointed to one of the photographs. This is you at a veterans charity dinner in Detroit, wearing a Purple Heart you never earned, telling a story about an IED blast in Fallujah that you read about in a newspaper. The same story, word for word, that was in Marine Sergeant Rodriguez's casualty report. Rodriguez, who actually was there. Rodriguez, who actually lost his leg. Rodriguez, who would be very interested to know someone's been stealing his pain. For party conversation, another photograph. This is you at the VFW Hall in Dearborn, claiming you served with the 1st Marine Division in Iraq. Problem is, the 1st MARDIV was never in Iraq during the time frame you claim. Small detail, but the kind that matters when you're committing federal crimes. A bank statement. This is a withdrawal from Noah's college fund, made while I was under fire in Helmand Province. $50,000, transferred to an account in your name. Money I saved doing overtime on base, eating MREs, and sleeping on cots so my son could have a future. Ethan was shaking now, the composed businessman facade crumbling like a sandcastle in a storm. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The expectations. Laura needed someone strong, someone successful. I was giving her what she needed. You were giving her what you needed, Daniel corrected. A war hero's wife to legitimize your stolen valor. A soldier's child to practice your authority on. A family that came pre-packaged with noble suffering and built-in sympathy. He looked at Laura, who was holding Noah close, both of them watching this confrontation with wide eyes. But here's what I really don't understand, Daniel continued. his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Here's the part that keeps me awake at night, Lavra. You knew. You knew he was lying about his service. You knew he was stealing from us. You knew he was hurting our son, and you stayed. Laura's face crumpled, years of suppressed guilt and shame and self-loathing finally spilling over. I was scared, she sobbed. I was so scared, Daniel. He said if I left him, if I tried to expose him, he'd destroy me. He had those recordings, those photographs. He said no court would give me custody if they saw them. He said I'd lose Noah, and you'd never forgive me, and I'd end up with nothing. So instead you let him turn our son into a punching bag? The words hung in the air like a slap, and Lavra flinched as if he'd actually hit her. I tried to protect him, she whispered. I tried to redirect Ethan's anger onto me. I took the worst of it. I let him do things to me so he'd leave Noah alone. Daniel felt something break inside his chest, something fundamental and irreplaceable. Because he could see the truth in her eyes now, could see the scars on her soul that matched the ones on Noah's body. She'd been trying to shield their son the only way she knew how. She'd been fighting a war too, just a different kind of war, the kind fought in bedrooms and behind closed doors, the kind where surrender meant survival and victory meant everyone. You loved stayed breathing. It didn't excuse what she'd done. Didn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it made it human. Understandable. The kind of impossible choice that breaks good people into pieces and leaves them trying to hold themselves together, with hope and denial and desperate bargains with a God who doesn't always answer. In the distance, the sound of engines rumbled through the night. Not cars. Something deeper. Heavier. The distinctive growl of Harley-Davidson motorcycles, getting closer. Laura's eyes went wide. Daniel, what did you do? I made some calls, he said. Turns out, Marines don't much like it when someone hurts their brother's family. Turns out, stolen valor is considered a personal insult. Turns out, brotherhood doesn't end when you come home. The sound grew louder, multiple bikes running in formation, their riders invisible in the darkness, but their intentions crystal clear. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidental. This was planned, coordinated, executed with military precision. 6 motorcycles rounded the corner, their headlights cutting through the November night like searchlights. They pulled up to the curb in perfect formation, engines idling in harmony, their riders wearing leather jackets adorned with military patches and unit insignia. Daniel recognized some of the faces under the helmets. Rodriguez, who'd lost his leg to an IED but still rode a bike modified for his prosthetic. Thompson, who'd taken shrapnel in the face and carried the scars like battle flags. Garcia, who'd been Daniel's squad leader, who'd brought him home alive more times than either of them could count. They didn't rev their engines or make a show of it. Didn't dismount or approach the house. They simply sat there, 12 Marines in perfect formation, watching, waiting, making sure everyone understood that Daniel Carter wasn't alone in this fight, that he'd never been alone. Ethan looked from the Marines to Daniel, to the evidence scattered at his feet, and for the first time since this confrontation began, real fear flickered behind his eyes. The kind of fear that comes from understanding that money and lawyers and legal papers weren't going to save him from this. What do you want? He asked, his voice cracking like ice under pressure. Daniel's voice was quiet as falling snow, calm as deep water. I want you gone. Tonight. Forever. I want all of my property returned. I want Noah's medical bills paid. I want the college fund restored. I want a signed confession about everything, the stolen valor, the fraud, the abuse. And I want you to disappear from our lives like you never existed. And if I refuse? Daniel looked at his brothers on their bikes, at the evidence scattered around his feet, at his son pressed against his leg like a small anchor in a storm. Then we let the system sort it out, he said simply. Federal prosecutors love stolen Valor cases, especially when they involve child abuse and financial fraud. The VO takes fraud very seriously. The IRS gets excited about unreported income and offshore accounts. And Marines? He glanced toward the street where his brothers waited in patient silence. Marines take care of their own. Ethan looked at Lavra, who was holding Noah close, both of them watching him with a mixture of fear and something that might have been hope. "Lavra," he said, his voice desperate now, all pretense gone. "You can't let him do this. Think about everything we built together. Think about the life we could have. Think about what you'll lose if I go to prison." Lavra looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd promised her everything and delivered only fear. This man who'd convinced her to betray her husband while he was fighting for strangers' freedom. This man who'd put his hands on her son in anger and called it discipline. She thought about the woman she'd been before she met him. The woman who'd married a Marine knowing it would mean deployments in danger and long nights alone. The woman who'd been strong enough to love a warrior despite all the reasons she shouldn't. She thought about the woman she'd become, fearful, dependent, complicit in her own child's abuse. A ghost of herself haunting her own life. She thought about the woman she wanted to be, the mother Noah deserved. The person she could still become if she found the courage to choose differently. "Go," she whispered. "Just go." And he did. 20-3 minutes later, a black BMW pulled out of the driveway, loaded with expensive clothes and broken promises and the kind of desperate haste that comes from understanding that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. It disappeared into the night, followed at a discreet distance by 6 motorcycles whose riders understood that sometimes justice wore combat boots, and sometimes protection came on 2 wheels, and sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with the simple revolutionary act of refusing to let evil win. Daniel stood on his porch, holding his son, watching his old life drive away and his real life finally begin. "Is he gone forever?" Noah asked, his small voice muffled against Daniel's shoulder. "Forever," Daniel promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "And you? Are you staying forever?" Daniel looked down at his boy, at this brave little soldier who'd survived a war no child should ever have to fight, who'd endured abuse and abandonment and terror but still had room in his heart for hope, who'd waited on cold porches and clutched broken toys and never stopped believing that Daddy would come home. "Forever," he said, and knew it was the truest thing he'd ever spoken. The Marines began to leave then, one by one, their engines fading into the distance like distant thunder. But not before each one raised a hand in silent salute to Daniel, to Noah, to the idea that some things were worth fighting for no matter the cost. Later, much later, after Noah had been bathed in warm water that washed away the dirt and fear of too many nights spent outdoors, after he'd been fed soup and sandwiches and hot chocolate that made him smile for the first time in months, after he'd been tucked into his own bed with his repaired toy soldier standing guard on the knitstand, Daniel sat on the porch where he'd found his son. Lavra was inside, packing boxes. She'd made the decision to leave, to go stay with her sister in Grand Rapids, while she figured out who she wanted to be now that she was free. It was the right choice, maybe the first right choice she'd made in years. Noah would visit her on weekends when she was ready, when they were both ready to start healing the wounds that ran deeper than bruises. The street was quiet now. Just another suburban neighborhood where ordinary people lived ordinary lives and worried about ordinary things. But Daniel wasn't ordinary people. Not anymore. War had changed him, forged him into something harder and more focused than the young man who'd shipped out 3 years ago. It had taught him that evil often wore familiar faces, that predators hunted with smiles and promises and the patient erosion of their victims' self-worth, that sometimes good men had to do terrible things to protect innocent people, that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with rifles and grenades, but with evidence files and legal papers and the quiet threat of consequences. His phone buzzed with messages from his brothers, checking in, making sure he was okay, offering whatever help he might need. Marines who understood that the war didn't end when you came home. That sometimes the hardest battles were fought in living rooms and courtrooms, and on cold porches where children shivered in the dark. One message made him smile. Heard you won the home front today, brother. Proud of you. Some wars are worth winning no matter the cost. Rodriguez sends his regards, said to tell you anyone who steals his war stories owes him a beer and a Purple Heart. Semper Fi. Daniel looked up at Noah's bedroom window, where a gentle nightlight glowed warm and safe. His son was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, protected by his father's love and his father's promise, and his father's absolute refusal to let evil win. But the old man's voice knows something else about that night. Friend, something Daniel couldn't see from his porch, something that would shape the days and weeks and years to come. You see, healing isn't a straight line. It's not like fixing a broken rifle or patching a hole in a uniform. It's messier than that. More complicated. It requires patience and faith and the kind of stubborn hope that refuses to die even when everything around it is burning. The next morning, Daniel woke to find Noah standing by his bed, clutching that repaired toy soldier like a talisman. The boy's eyes were wide with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't quite trust either. Daddy? Noah's voice was small in the dawn light, filtering through the bedroom curtains. Are you really staying? Because here's the thing about trauma, about the kind of wounds that go deeper than skin. They heal slowly. They require more than promises and good intentions. They require proof, day after day, moment by moment, that the world has changed for good. Daniel sat up, pushing aside the ghosts of his own nightmares, the ones where he was still in the desert, still hearing mortar fall, still watching good men die, and focused on the only thing that mattered, this small person who needed him to be present, to be real, to be the father he'd always meant to be. I'm really staying, son. But what if they make you go back to the war? There's no they anymore, Noah. I served my time. Did my duty. Now my duty is here, with you. Noah climbed up onto the bed, settling against Daniel's side like he used to when he was smaller, when the world made more sense and Daddy was the strongest man alive and monsters only existed in bedtime stories. Will you teach me to be a soldier like you? The question hit Daniel in a place he didn't expect. Because how do you tell a 7-year-old that being a soldier isn't about the uniforms or the medals or the stories people tell at dinner parties? How do you explain that real soldiers are made in moments like this one, when someone small and vulnerable depends on you to be better than your own pain? I'll teach you to be brave, Daniel said finally. I'll teach you to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. I'll teach you that real strength isn't about hurting others. It's about protecting them. Like you protected me. Like we'll protect each other. They sat there in the quiet morning light, father and son, both of them carrying wounds that would take time to heal. But they had time now. They had each other. They had the kind of second chance that doesn't come often and shouldn't be wasted. Weeks that followed were a lesson in patience. Noah had nightmares, not every night, but often enough. He flinched at sudden movements, jumped at loud noises, asked the same questions over and over as if repetition could make the answers more real. Daniel had his own struggles. 3 years of hypervigilance don't just disappear because you're home. He woke up reaching for weapons that weren't there, scanning rooms for threats that didn't exist, feeling his heart rate spike every time a car backfired or a door slammed. But they worked through it together. Daniel taught Noah how to throw a baseball, how to tie proper knots, how to start a campfire safely. Simple things. Father-son things. The kind of ordinary moments that build trust one conversation at a time. Noah taught Daniel how to be present. How to focus on right now instead of reliving yesterday or worrying about tomorrow. How to find joy in small things, ice cream cones, cartoon shows, bedtime stories that had to be read exactly the same way every single night. Laura visited on weekends, tentative at first, like someone learning to walk on ice. She was different now, quieter, more careful, but also more genuine. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced with jeans and sweaters that looked comfortable rather than impressive. She'd started therapy, she told Daniel one afternoon while Noah played in the yard. Started dealing with the choices she'd made and the person she'd become. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, watching their son chase fallen leaves with the kind of pure joy that only children can manage. I know what I did, what I allowed. But I want you to know I'm trying to be better. For him, for me, even if it's too late for us. Daniel studied her face, looking for the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. She was still there, underneath the guilt and regret and hard-won wisdom. Changed, but not destroyed. Wounded, but not broken beyond repair. It's not about forgiveness, Laura. It's about what happens next. It's about proving that people can change, that mistakes don't have to be permanent, that love can survive even when everything else falls apart. They weren't a family anymore, not in the traditional sense. But they were something else. 3 people learning how to care for each other despite their scars, how to build something new from the wreckage of what used to be. The legal battles were swift and decisive. Ethan's stolen valor conviction made national news, not because he was famous, but because the case was so clear-cut, so thoroughly documented, that it became a teaching example for federal prosecutors. 5 years in federal prison, restitution for the money he'd stolen, and a permanent place on the sex offender registry for the abuse of Noah. The other charges, fraud, identity theft, extortion, added another decade to his sentence. He would be an old man before he saw freedom again, and when he did, he would find a world that had moved on without him. Justice, Daniel learned, sometimes moves slowly. But when it arrives, it can be thorough. The insurance money came through. The policies Ethan had taken out, using Daniel's forged signature, were voided. But the legitimate ones he'd maintained during his deployment paid out handsomely for the documented abuse Noah had suffered. Enough to secure his son's future, to pay for therapy and college and whatever dreams he might discover along the way. Daniel used some of it to buy a house. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed money or success. Just a simple 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and friendly neighbors and a big backyard, where a boy could play without fear. He hung his Purple Hearts in Noah's room, not as trophies, but as reminders. Reminders that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite the fear. Reminders that sometimes heroes are just ordinary people who refuse to quit when quitting would be easier. The Bronze Star he kept in a drawer. Some medals are for the people who give them. Others are for the people who earn them. That one was between him and the brothers he'd served with, the ones who'd made it home and the ones who hadn't. One evening, nearly 6 months after that cold November night, Daniel found Noah in the backyard, playing with his toy soldiers. But these weren't games of war and violence. Noah had arranged them in careful formations around a small fort he'd built from cardboard boxes, and they were protecting a group of smaller figures, children, families, people who needed defending. "What's the story tonight, son?" Daniel asked, settling down beside him in the grass. "The good soldiers came home," Noah said seriously, adjusting one of the figures. "And they made sure nobody could hurt the kids anymore. And the kids got to be kids again." Such a simple story. Such a powerful truth. Daniel watched his son play, this resilient little person who'd survived more trauma than most adults ever face, who'd emerged from darkness with his capacity for joy intact, who'd learned the difference between strength and violence, between protection and control, between love and possession. "Daddy," Noah looked up from his toy soldiers, "when I grow up, I want to be like you. but not a soldier. A different kind. What kind is that? The kind that protects kids who don't have anybody to protect them. The kind that makes sure bad people can't hurt good people. The kind that brings daddies home. Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper and more complex. Pride, yes, but also hope. The kind of hope that believes in second chances and new beginnings, and the possibility that broken things can be made whole again. I think that's the best kind of soldier there is, he said. As summer turned to fall and fall turned to winter, their new life took shape. Daniel found work with a veterans organization, helping other soldiers transition from military to civilian life. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful. It was about using his experiences, both the good and the terrible, to help others navigate their own paths home. Noah thrived in his new school, made friends, joined Little League, started sleeping through the night without nightmares. The healing was gradual, almost invisible day to day, but undeniable when Daniel looked back at where they'd started. Lovra found her own path too. She moved back to town, rented a small apartment, got a job at the local library, started rebuilding her relationship with Noah slowly, carefully, earning back trust one conversation at a time. She would never be the same woman she'd been before Ethan, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the woman she was becoming was stronger, wiser, more honest about her own flaws and limitations. On Noah's 8th birthday, Daniel gave him a new toy soldier. Not green plastic this time, but a hand-carved wooden figure that an old Marine buddy had made. It wore no uniform, carried no weapon. Instead, it held a small child in its arms, protecting, not attacking. "This is Sergeant Peace," Daniel told his son. "His job isn't to fight wars. His job is to make sure wars end. His job is to bring people home." Noah held the figure carefully, studying its weathered face and gentle expression. "Does he ever get scared?" Noah asked. "Every day," Daniel admitted, "but he does his job anyway. Because that's what heroes do. They feel the fear and do the right thing anyway, like you did with Ethan. Like we all do, son. Every day we choose to be brave instead of cruel, kind instead of angry, protective instead of destructive. That's what makes someone a hero. Not the medals or the uniforms or the stories. Just the choice to be better than their fear." That night, as Daniel tucked Noah into bed, his son asked one more question. "Daddy, do you think Ethan will ever be sorry? Really sorry?" Daniel considered this carefully. It was the kind of question that deserved honesty, not platitudes. "I don't know, son. Some people learn from their mistakes and become better. Others just learn to hide their mistakes better. But that's not our concern anymore. Our concern is making sure we become the kind of people we want to be, regardless of what anyone else chooses." "I want to be like you," Noah said sleepily. "I want to be like you," Daniel replied, and meant it. Brave enough to trust after being hurt, strong enough to love after being afraid, smart enough to know that being tough doesn't mean being mean. As Noah drifted off to sleep, Daniel sat by his bedside for a while, watching his son's peaceful face in the glow of the night light. This child who'd survived so much. This child who'd taught him that coming home from war wasn't just about geography, it was about learning to live in peace. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first of the season. It covered the world in clean white silence, making everything look fresh and new and possible. Daniel thought about the porch where he'd found Noah a year ago. How different everything had been then, how impossible this moment would have seemed. But that's the thing about hope, about the stubborn refusal to give up on the people we love. It makes miracles look ordinary. It makes healing look like inevitability instead of the hard-fought victory it really is. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. "How's the home front, brother?" Daniel looked around the quiet room, at his son sleeping peacefully, at The toy soldiers standing guard on the knitstand, at the purple hearts hanging on the wall like promises kept and promises yet to be made. He typed back, "Mission accomplished. All souls accounted for." And for the first time in years, Daniel Carter felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel: complete peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. Not the end of struggle, but the knowledge that some struggles are worth everything you have to give. He was home. His son was safe. His family was healing. And tomorrow, the sun would rise on another day of second chances, another opportunity. To choose love over fear, protection over revenge, hope over despair. Some wars are worth winning, his friend had said. Daniel looked at his sleeping son. This small miracle he'd helped create. This perfect blend of resilience and innocence and stubborn hope. "Damn right they are," he whispered to the falling snow dot. And in the morning, when Noah woke up and asked if they could have pancakes for breakfast, Daniel said yes. Because sometimes the most important battles are won not with weapons or strategies or tactical superiority, but with pancakes and bedtime stories and the simple, revolutionary act of showing up day after day for the people who need you most. The old man's voice fades now. "Friend, but the story doesn't end here. It continues in every choice Daniel makes, every day he chooses to be the father Noah needs. It continues in Laura's slow journey back to herself, in her growing relationship with the son she almost lost. It continues in Noah's laughter, in his dreams, in his growing understanding that the world can be cruel, but doesn't have to be. That people can hurt each other, but can also heal. Some stories end with victory parades and medals, and the kind of recognition that history remembers. But the best stories, the ones that matter most, end with quiet moments in warm houses, with children sleeping safely, with the knowledge that love's stubborn, persistent. Refusal to quit love has won another small victory against the darkness. And sometimes, friend, that's the only victory that really matters. But the old man's voice has more to tell, because some stories have layers like sedimentary rock, each one revealing something deeper about the human condition. You see, Daniel Carter thought his war was over that night when Ethan drove away into the darkness. But he was wrong. The hardest battle was just beginning. 2 years passed. 2 years of what looked like healing from the outside, but felt like walking through quicksand from the inside. Noah was 10 now, taller, stronger, but still carrying invisible wounds that showed themselves in unexpected moments. Like the way he flinched when someone raised their voice, even in laughter. Like the way he counted exits in every room he entered. Like the way he hoarded food in his bedroom, small caches of crackers and granola bars hidden in drawers and under his mattress insurance. Against the hunger he'd known when he was left outside for hours. Daniel saw these things because he recognized them. Because a soldier learns to read the signs of trauma, to understand that healing isn't linear, that progress comes in waves rather than straight lines. He'd done his own time in therapy, sitting across from a patient woman who helped him untangle the knot of guilt and rage and helplessness that had formed in his chest during those 3 years overseas. "You blame yourself," Dr. Sarah Martinez had told him during one particularly difficult session, "for leaving, for not seeing what was happening, for not being there when Noah needed you most." "Shouldn't I?" Daniel had asked. What kind of father abandons his child to serve strangers? The kind who loves his country enough to sacrifice for it. The kind who believes in something bigger than himself. The kind who had no way of knowing that evil would come wearing a familiar face. But understanding guilt and releasing it are two different things entirely. The flashback still came sometimes. Not of Afghanistan, though those haunted him too, but of that night on the porch. He would wake up sweating, heart pounding, seeing Noah's small form shivering in the cold, hearing his son's whispered question, "Are you staying this time?" Because that's the thing about being a father, about loving someone more than your own life. Their pain becomes your pain. Their trauma becomes your trauma. Their healing becomes the most important mission you'll ever undertake. Laura's journey was different, but equally complicated. She'd thrown herself into therapy with the desperation of a drowning woman, grasping for a life preserver. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times when the memories got too heavy to carry alone. She was learning about trauma bonding, about the psychology of abuse, about how good people can make terrible choices when they're scared enough. "I used to think I was weak," she told Daniel one Sunday afternoon while Noah played in the backyard with friends from his Little League team. "I used to think that what happened was my fault for not being strong enough to leave." They were sitting on the front porch, not the same porch where Daniel had found Noah, but the new one on their new house where bad memories couldn't reach. Laura had brought homemade cookies for Noah and his friends, another small step in her campaign to earn back the right to be called mother instead of just the woman who gave birth to him. "And now?" Daniel asked. "Now I understand that surviving takes its own kind of strength. That protecting Noah the only way I knew how was better than not protecting him at all. That being trapped doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." She was different now, quieter in some ways, more thoughtful, but also fiercer, like someone who'd walked through fire and discovered she was made of stronger stuff than she'd ever imagined. She'd cut her hair short, stopped wearing makeup most days, traded the expensive clothes Ethan had bought her for jeans and sweaters that belonged to her, not to his vision of who she should be. "I've been thinking," she said, watching Noah demonstrate his batting stance to a friend who was appropriately impressed, "about going back to school, getting my teaching degree, working with kids who might need someone who understands." Daniel studied her face, looking for the uncertainty he'd grown accustomed to seeing there. Instead, he found determination, purpose, the kind of quiet strength that comes not from never being broken, but from learning how to put yourself back together. "Noah would be proud of that," he said. "Would you?" The question hung between them like a bridge they weren't sure either of them was ready to cross. Because forgiveness is complicated, and love doesn't just disappear because it's been betrayed. It transforms, becomes something different, something that acknowledges the past while refusing to be imprisoned by it. "I'm already proud of who you're becoming," Daniel said finally. "The woman who's fighting for her son. The woman who's brave enough to face her mistakes. The woman who's choosing to heal instead of hiding." That night, after Laura had gone back to her apartment and Noah was asleep, Daniel found himself standing in the kitchen, staring at a photograph on the refrigerator. It was from Noah's last Little League game, the one where he'd hit his first home run. In the picture, Noah was grinning at the camera, grass stains on his uniform, dirt smudged on his cheek, holding up the game ball like it was made of pure gold. But it wasn't Noah's joy that caught Daniel's attention, it was what else the photograph showed. Laura in the bleachers cheering. Daniel beside the dugout, hands cupped around his mouth, shouting encouragement. 3 separate people who were learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, how to be a family again. Not the same kind of family they'd been before, but maybe something stronger. Something that had been tested and hadn't shattered completely. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Daniel glanced at the caller ID and smiled. "Rodriguez, how's the home front, Marine?" His old friend's voice carried the familiar warmth of shared experience, of bonds forged in places where trust meant survival. "Complicated," Daniel said honestly. "Good, but complicated. The best things usually are. How's the boy?" Daniel looked toward the stairs, where Noah was presumably fast asleep, though sometimes he still woke with nightmares about men with angry voices and cold porches, and the fear that Daddy might leave again. Getting stronger every day. Started asking questions about the military. Wants to know what it was like over there. You telling him? The parts I can. The parts that won't give him nightmares he doesn't already have. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. He understood the weight of that decision, the delicate balance between honesty and protection that every veteran father had to navigate. You know, Rodriguez said finally, my daughter asked me something last week that got me thinking. She asked, why some soldiers come home angry, and others come home sad, and others come home different. And I told her that war shows you things about human nature, both the worst and the best. And how you carry that knowledge depends on what you choose to focus on. What did you tell her to focus on? The fact that even in the worst places, with the worst people doing the worst things, there are always someone willing to risk everything to protect someone else. That even when everything falls apart, there are people who refuse to let it fall completely. That love is stronger than hate, even when hate seems to be winning. Daniel felt something settle in his chest, a piece he hadn't known he was missing. Because that was the truth he'd been trying to teach Noah without knowing how to put it into words. That the world could be cruel, but it didn't have to be. That people could hurt each other, but they could also heal each other. That sometimes the most important victories were the quiet ones, the ones that happened in living rooms and backyards and around kitchen tables where families learned how to trust each other again. Thanks, brother, Daniel said. I needed to. Hear that? We all need reminding sometimes. How's that stolen valor piece of garbage, by the way? Daniel's jaw tightened involuntarily. Even 2 years later, the mention of Ethan could still trigger the cold rage that lived in his chest like a pilot light, always ready to flare into something dangerous. 15 years total, won't be eligible for parole for 12. Word is he's not doing well in federal prison. Turns out, child abusers aren't popular with the general population. Even less popular when they're also stolen valor cases. Good, Rodriguez said with savage satisfaction. Let me know if he ever gets out. Some conversations need to be had. Face to face. After they hung up, Daniel walked through his house, checking locks out of habit, looking in on Noah out of love. His son was sprawled across his bed in that boneless way only children could manage. One arm wrapped around Sergeant Peace, the wooden soldier that had become his most treasured possession. On the knitstand, Daniel's purple hearts caught the moonlight streaming through the window. Noah had asked about them recently, wanted to know why Daddy kept medals in his room instead of wearing them. Because they're not for show, Daniel had explained. They're for remembering. For honoring. The people who didn't make it home. For making sure we never forget that freedom isn't free. Did it hurt? Noah had asked. Getting hurt enough to earn those. Daniel had considered lying, giving one of those sanitized answers that adults give children to protect them from hard truths. But Noah had earned the right to honesty. He'd survived his own war, earned his own scars. He deserved respect, not condescension. Yes, Daniel had said simply, it hurt a lot. But the hurt was worth it, because it meant I could come home to you. Do you think I'll ever be brave enough to be a soldier? You're already brave enough. Son, you've been fighting battles most adults couldn't handle, and you're still here, still kind, still willing to trust and love and hope. That's the rarest kind of courage there is. Now, watching Noah sleep, Daniel thought about the battles his son had fought and the ones he would face in the years to come. 10 years old was too young to carry the weight Noah carried, but he was carrying it anyway, with a grace and resilience that humbled his father every single day. The next morning brought one of those perfect autumn days that make you believe in second chances. The air was crisp but not cold. The leaves were turning colors that belonged in paintings, and Noah woke up without nightmares for the 3rd straight week. Daddy, he said over breakfast, syrup from his pancakes making his words slightly sticky. Can we visit Mama today? I want to show her the story I wrote for school. Daniel felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever Noah referred to Lavra as Mama instead of just Lavra or my mother. Because forgiveness is complicated, especially when it involves someone you once loved completely and now love carefully, with boundaries and conditions and the constant awareness that trust, once broken, is never quite the same when it heals. What's the story about? He asked. It's about a soldier who comes home and has to fight a different kind of war. A war for his family. And he wins, but not with guns or anything. He wins with love and patience and help from his friends. Daniel's throat tightened. That sounds like a good story. Mrs. Patterson said it was the best one in the class. She said it was brave to write about hard things. They drove to Laura's apartment in comfortable silence, Noah chattering about his story about the upcoming school play where he'd landed the role of a tree. Not just any tree. Daddy the wise old oak that gives advice to all the forest animals. About his friend Tommy's upcoming birthday party, normal things. Child things. The kind of conversations Daniel had dreamed about during those long nights in the desert, when he wondered if he'd ever get to be a regular dad having regular talks with his regular kid. Lara lived in a small apartment complex that tried hard to look cheerful with bright paint and flower boxes, but couldn't quite hide the fact that it was the kind of place people lived when they were starting over. Her unit was on the second floor, with a view of the parking lot and a balcony, just big enough for a single chair and a few potted plants. She answered the door in jeans and a Michigan State sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup. Looking younger and more like the woman Daniel had fallen in love with all those years ago. Noah. She knelt to hug him, and Daniel watched carefully for signs of tension or fear in his son's body language. But Noah hugged her back easily, naturally, the way a child should hug his mother. I brought my story to show you, Noah announced, pulling away to dig in his backpack. It's about Daddy coming home and saving us from the bad man. Laura's eyes met Daniel's over Noah's head, and he saw the flash of pain there, the guilt that probably lived in her chest, the way combat flashbacks lived in his. I can't wait to read it, she said, leading them into her small living room. The apartment was simple but warm, filled with photographs of Noah and books, so many books that they overflowed the single bookcase and lived in stacks on every available surface. Daniel recognized some of them: psychology texts, books about trauma and healing, parenting guides, educational theory. She was serious about going back to school, about becoming the kind of person who could help other children who'd been where Noah had been. Noah settled onto the couch and began reading his story aloud, his young voice serious and important as he navigated the big words he'd looked up in the dictionary. Daniel and Lara listened, both of them trying not to cry as their son told the story of their family's darkest chapter and brightest victory in the matter-of-fact way that children use to process experiences too big for their understanding. The soldier was very brave, Noah read, but the little boy was brave too. Even when the bad man was mean to him, he never stopped believing his daddy would come home. And the mama was brave in a different way. She made mistakes, but she learned how to fix them. And in the end, they all learned that families can be broken and still be families. They just have to work harder at loving each other. When he finished, the silence in the small apartment was profound. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with emotion and recognition and the kind of truth that children sometimes stumble into without realizing how profound it is. That's beautiful, baby, Lara said finally, her voice thick with tears she was trying not to shed in front of Noah. You're such a good writer. Mrs. Patterson says I should enter it in the district contest. Do you think I should? Daniel looked at his son, this resilient, thoughtful, brave little person who'd taken their family's trauma and transformed it into art, into hope, into a story that might help other people feel less alone. I think you should, he said. I think the world needs to hear stories like that. Later, after Noah had shown Lara his latest baseball cards and demonstrated his improving batting stance in the apartment's small courtyard, after she'd made them grilled cheese sandwiches and hot chocolate, they found themselves alone while Noah played with the neighbor's dog in the yard below. He's doing well, Lara said, watching their son through the window. Better than I hoped. Better than I probably deserve. You deserve a son who loves you, Daniel said quietly. You deserve a second chance. We all do. She turned to look at him, and he saw years of therapy in her eyes, years of work and growth and painful self-examination. I've been thinking about something my therapist said, Lavra continued. She said that trauma doesn't just hurt the person it happens to, it radiates out like ripples in a pond. But so does healing. Every choice I make to be better, to do better. It helps Noah heal too. It helps you heal. It helps us all move forward. Daniel nodded. He'd learned the same thing in his own therapy, his own long journey back from the desert, and the darkness he'd carried home with him. I have something to tell you, Lavra said, her voice carrying a weight that made Daniel tense. Involuntarily. I've been accepted to the education program at Michigan State. I start in January. Lavra, I'll still see Noah on weekends. Nothing changes there, but I'll be living on campus during the week. It's a 2-year program, intense, but when I graduate, I'll be qualified to work with special needs children. Kids who've been through trauma. Daniel studied her face, looking for the uncertainty he'd grown accustomed to seeing there. Instead, he found determination, purpose, the kind of quiet strength that comes not from never being broken, but from learning how to put yourself back together in a way that makes you useful to other broken things. I'm proud of you, he said, and meant it completely. Even though I'm moving away again, you're not moving away. You're moving forward. There's a difference. That evening, driving home through the autumn darkness, Noah asked one of those questions that children ask when they've been thinking deeply about adult things they don't quite understand. Daddy, do you still love Mama? Daniel considered his answer carefully, because Noah deserved honesty, but also needed security, needed to know that the adults in his life could be counted on to put his well-being above their own complicated emotions. I love the woman she's becoming, he said finally. I love her for being your mother. I love her for being brave enough to get help. I love her for choosing to heal instead of hiding. But it's a different kind of love than it used to be. Different. How? Safer, more careful, but still real. Noah was quiet for several miles, processing this in the way that 10-year-olds process complex emotional information, slowly, thoughtfully, with occasional questions that cut straight to the heart of things. Adults spend years in therapy trying to understand. I think that's okay, he said eventually. I think maybe that's how families are supposed to work when they get broken. They don't go back to the way they were, but they become something new, something that works better. Daniel glanced at his son in the rearview mirror, this wise small person, who'd survived more than most adults ever face and emerged with his capacity for love and forgiveness intact. When did you get so smart? He asked. I've always been smart. Noah replied with the matter-of-fact confidence of childhood. I just didn't have anyone to be smart with before. That night, after Noah was asleep, Daniel sat on his back porch with a cup of coffee and thought about the strange, winding path that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, he'd been a soldier coming home to a war he didn't know he'd have to fight. Tonight, he was a father whose son was thriving, whose ex-wife was healing, whose family was rebuilding itself into something stronger and more honest than it had ever been before. His phone buzzed with a text from Lavra. Thank you for today, for letting Noah share his story, for supporting my decision about school, for being the kind of man who can forgive without forgetting, who can love without conditions. Daniel stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you. For fighting for yourself. For showing Noah that people can change. For proving that love is stronger than fear. The old man's voice grows quieter now, friend, but the story continues to unfold like a flower opening to the sun. Because healing isn't a destination, it's a journey. And sometimes the most important parts of the journey happen in moments so small you might miss them if you're not paying attention. Like the morning Noah woke up and realized he hadn't thought about Ethan in weeks. Like the afternoon Lavra signed up for her first college class in 15 years. Like the evening Daniel realized he could think about the war without his hands shaking, could remember his fallen brothers with gratitude instead of guilt, could love his family without the constant fear that loving them made them vulnerable. These are the victories that matter most, the ones that happen in quiet moments when nobody's watching, when there are no cameras or medals or parades. These are the wars worth winning, the battles worth fighting, the kind of heroism that happens in living rooms and kitchens and around dinner tables where families learn how to trust each other again. And that, friend, is what real courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to love anyway, to heal anyway, to hope anyway, even when hope feels like the most dangerous thing in the world.